How much can you expect to spend on a yearly basis if you have a $250K, $500K, $1 million, or perhaps a $2 million plus portfolio? How much you might spend will depend on a lot of factors that we're going to discuss today, and knowing what your portfolio will actually allow you to spend is also very important for planning purposes. In this video, you'll learn the relationship between portfolio sizes and how much you'll be able to spend in retirement, and this is of course including many factors such as other types of income as well as taxes. And if you just started saving and investing, I think this video is going to be extremely valuable because it's going to show you what portfolio numbers you should aim for in your life, and that way you have a clear North Star goal in terms of what you want to work towards. Let's start with the 250K portfolio size, and then we will work our way up to a 500K, $1 million, and $2 million portfolio. Now, in each of these sections, I'll also give you one big takeaway for retirement planning. Okay, so starting at 250K at this size, this is well below the average retirement savings for all families, and that's according to the 2022 survey of consumer finances. So usually the average retirement savings for families is $333,940. Now, many people are going to find themselves at the $250,000 mark when they retire, but I'm going to show you guys that this is not the most dire of situations. Obviously, it's not as big as the other portfolio sizes, but you could still hypothetically spend a decent amount of money on an annual basis, even with this balance. So first, you must know that there was a famous study conducted at the Trinity University back in 1998. In that study, they concluded that you could withdraw 4% of your retirement balance every single year to have a high probability of not running out of money in retirement. That was over a 30-year retirement, but what people don't like to talk about is that in many cases, retirees could end up with more money after 30 years than they started with, particularly under favorable market conditions. Now, if you have a smaller balance like 250K in retirement savings, I'm just going to make a few assumptions. First, I'm going to make the assumption that you probably will not be passing on an inheritance because you probably need that money for yourself. And ideally, you are as comfortable as you can be before you kick the bucket. That means we ideally are going to be depleting our portfolios to zero by the time the 30-year retirement concludes. Given the average life expectancy in the United States of 76.3 years old, if you retired at the age of 65, you could theoretically only need your portfolio to last 11 years. But I think that's a little bit depressing and morbid. I think we should always shoot to live a little bit longer, so we're still going to assume 30 years today in our example. Another assumption we should make is that in America, you'll have some sort of social security or pension income by the time you retire. Or if you're in another country like Canada, you may have an old age security payment or perhaps the Canadian pension plan, which is known as the CPP. So here's a table of what that might look like, and this also assumes that you get the average social security payment of $19.07 per month. This does not include cost of living adjustments for social security or the inflation rate of 2%. Now, future scenarios will, but I did want to illustrate a simple example of what you can roughly expect to spend given if you have some supplemental income and you're willing to withdraw from your portfolio at a heavy percentage. Your total annual income could be $41,712, even with a $250,000 portfolio balance. But this is not a conservative retirement approach. The withdrawal rate here is going to be much higher, and it also assumes that you're going to be getting 7% of a return on your portfolio every single year in the next 30 years. Now, in reality, we know that the market doesn't simply return 7% every year indefinitely. Some years you may be up 10, 15, 20%, and some years you'll be down 5, 10, or 15%. So this is where some common sense will come in here. If you're recklessly spending every single year, you will probably run out of money in this scenario, especially in a year where the market might be down quite a bit. In the next section, we'll cover dynamic spending, but however, I just wanted to illustrate that retirement could still be possible on a $250,000 balance given proper financial planning and a willingness to take on a little bit more risk. You're not going to be as conservative here with a 4% rule when you only have $250,000. You might actually have to be a little bit riskier and take on a little bit more of a withdrawal rate in order to just meet your spending needs. Now, if we were to just use only the 4% rule, you could realistically spend about $10K per year from your portfolio. Plus, if you add in that Social Security, you could expect to spend around $32,000 to $33,000 per year on the low end. If you wanted to be more aggressive, then you can go up to that $41.7K per year. Of course, this is very straightforward and rather elementary. We still have to account for a lot of other types of income, taxes, inflation, and spending strategies. So realistically, the annual amount of income that you'll be able to spend at the $250,000 level will probably be a little bit lower than those numbers reported. However, we will cover those strategies in the next bucket of the $500,000 portfolio, so let's talk about it. At the $500,000 balance, you start to get a little bit more freedom compared to the 250K balance, but it's still a portfolio size where you need to be cautious of other factors like market volatility, unexpected healthcare costs, and perhaps you have some considerations like You want to leave some assets for your kids or your family members. You will get a little bit more flexibility in that regard with a bigger balance versus with the $250,000 balance. I feel like you are really forced to really care about yourself and yourself only to make it work. All right, so with a $500,000 portfolio, sticking with the 4% rule, you can withdraw $20,000 after tax from your portfolio every year, which is already double than the previous scenario. If we add in Social Security, that comes out to $42,884 on the low end. And if we want to do the same exercise as earlier, where we deplete our portfolio value by the time that 30 years is up, then we can actually go for an expected withdrawal amount of $60,541 per year. Now, one concept that I think is always going to help your balance last longer is if you employ a strategy of dynamic spending. So that's when the stock market performs well, we spend and withdraw a little bit more, but when the market performs poorly, we want to spend a little bit less. That way, when the market does rebound, we actually capture more of the upside, allowing our money to go further in retirement and increase our portfolio longevity. Vanguard has an interesting report out that says that if you have a $1 million portfolio and you're faced with two scenarios, one where the market performs plus 10% in 1 year and one where the market performs minus 10%, the withdrawal in your positive year should be slightly more than the withdrawal that you take in the down year. So for example, in the positive year, you want to be taking out $42,000 versus in the down year, you want to withdraw $39,400. Now, if everything was flat, then you would take out $40,000. So you can see that in a down year, you're going to take $600 less than the 4% rule. And in a positive year, you actually take $2,000 more than the 4% rule. This is so that your portfolio balance stays as large as it possibly can be during down years. And then so therefore, when positive years eventually come, your portfolio is as big as it can be to capture that upside. That paper is super in depth, so I will actually link it down below in case you want to read it after this video. Another point I want to bring up about any retirement number today is that your retirement spend and how long it will last will completely depend on your own spending priorities, as well as just how much you're spending in general. For example, do you want to travel a lot after you retire? How often do you want to buy a new car? When do you want to retire? And of course, how much do you want to spend ultimately every year? If you're used to eating sushi dinners and living on a lawyer's salary, you're going to need a lot more in retirement than someone who might have more of a modest career and modest lifestyle. Similarly, if you live in, let's say, New York or San Francisco versus somewhere like Pontiac, Michigan, you're going to need a lot more money. Most people try to maintain their standard of living, but if you want to estimate your spend in retirement, there is the 80% rule that can provide some guidance here. The 80% rule states that whatever you're making on an annual basis, plan to spend about 80% of that in retirement. So if your salary was $100K per year, plan to spend about 80% or $80,000 every year in retirement. Of course, this really depends on how much you're making as well, because if you make less than 50K per year, you should try to stick to the 80% rule. But if you make, let's say, 150K per year, you might be able to live off a lower income percentage. Here's the table from Fidelity that has good suggestions on what rules you should be sticking to. And for most people, it's going to be between a range of 55 to 80% for your estimated income replacement ratio. If you want to remain active in retirement and travel the world and do fun experiences, then you're likely going to need more money than someone who wants to just sit at home. Like me, for example, if I'm just playing chess every day in retirement, that's a pretty cheap hobby. The idea here is that you really need to sit down with either your spouse and optionally perhaps a financial planner to really assess how much you want to spend in retirement. Because that's going to dictate whether or not you retire at, say, age 65 with a $500,000 portfolio balance, or perhaps you want to work until you're 68 or 69 or even 70 years old and save up just a little bit more money to make the remaining years more comfortable. All right, but let's talk about the $1 million portfolio size now, because it's at this portfolio size that I would say most people are super enthusiastic with this amount, because at 4% withdrawal rate, that's still $40,000 a year, excluding any Social Security or different types of pension plans. It's really at this level that you should also consider some softer considerations. For example, what your annual expenses are after taking into account how much you want to spend. If you want a new car every 5 years or so, and that's high on your priority list, then you'll want to factor that into your planning. Another consideration to keep in mind is if you're looking to travel, that's going to add some annual expenses every year, as well as healthcare starts to get more expensive the older that you get. Like for example, if you wanted to take 3 trips every single year and you wanted to ball out on these trips at $5,000 a trip, you're looking at an additional $15,000 per year that's going to be added into your expenses. Of course, there's no really right answer here. You just really have to understand what you want to be spending in retirement, so that previous rule will really help here. But if you want to take more trips, you want that new car, you want to spend more on healthcare, it's all going to add up in your annual expenditures. So let's go through a case study then of somebody with a $1 million retirement balance. And let's say they spend roughly $60,000 per year in annual expenses expenses, including, let's say, traveling and getting a new car. This person will also receive the average Social Security payment every single month and every single year, and has to pay ordinary income taxes on their 401k withdrawals of, let's say, 10%. This is a rather simplified tax rate, but I'm just using it for the example. The formula to figure out what their annual spend is going to be represented by the following equation, which is annual expenses minus Social Security income minus other income divided by 1 plus their portfolio growth rate, subtracting their taxes. Now, while that's a pretty good formula, I think it's easier represented in a table, so that's actually what I have pulled up right here. You can see that this person withdraws 4% every year from their portfolio. So this column right here, the annual withdrawal column, that is going to be $40,000 every year, or 4%. You'll notice though, at the end of year 1, that the portfolio value still went from $1 million to $1.025 million, and that's because the portfolio is growing at an assumed rate of 7%. So this person is withdrawing 4% of their portfolio every year, and even after considering the taxes on withdrawals, you still will easily be able to have the income required of at least $60,000 in retirement. You can see that as the years go by, even by the end of year 30, you actually end up with $2.45 million at the end of this whole retirement cycle. And the idea here is that your withdrawal rate is rather low compared to how much you're actually earning on that portfolio itself. So in this situation, you aren't really in any threat of running out of money, but this again assumes no stock market volatility. To really ensure that we stay in a good position, we'll need to employ perhaps a dynamic spending rule like I talked about earlier. However, I did want to illustrate that a $1 million portfolio is pretty good by the time you retire, especially if you're modest with your spending and especially if you get Social Security. Now, going with a more extreme example here, what if we had zero Social Security? So let's just pretend we only had the portfolio and the portfolio itself. Well, you can actually see what that looks like here in this second table, and I'm also assuming that you want to withdraw $60,000 every single year. However, in this scenario, you will run out of money by year 28, and that's not even considering any stock market volatility as well. That just goes to show you how powerful some additional income is going to be in making your retirement last, because in the earlier scenario, the only difference is the Social Security. Those payments were basically bridging the gap between the 4% that we take out every single year and our annual expenses required, and it became virtually impossible to run out of money based on those assumptions. So I'd say with a $1 million portfolio balance, you can ideally spend between $40K on the low end with just a portfolio. And if we include Social Security and other types of income, it could be easily in the 60 to 70K range in retirement. If you want to get even more aggressive with withdrawal rates, you could probably even push that to 80, 90K. But you know, a lot of people, they want to stay conservative. All right, so let's actually talk about the $2 million balance now, because it should go without saying that if you have a $2 million retirement balance, life is likely pretty peachy. You can spend upwards of $80,000 per year with the 4% rule and not really have to worry too much at all. If you add in some additional income, it gets even sweeter, and your portfolio will just start to compound and compound for you as the years go on. Even in this example where I have a $100,000 net withdrawal amount every single year, you can see that because our portfolio size is so large to begin with, we're able to withdraw more of an absolute dollar amount and not even run out of money by year 30. At the $2 million level, you probably are already meeting with financial planners to really make sure that your portfolio won't ever run out of money, and you're probably focused more on, let's say, tax strategy or estate planning as well. Most portfolios that have an asset allocation split of 50-50 between stocks and bonds is the safest for ensuring that you don't run out of money even in the worst stretches of the stock market. I have a separate video with a little section on the asset allocation split that you should have in your retirement portfolio, which I will link down below as well. Now, building a $2 million portfolio is pretty hard, but it starts with consistently saving and investing over time. If you're just starting out, the best strategy is to contribute as much as you can to tax advantage accounts like the IRA, 401k, Roth versions of either of those as well. By maxing out these accounts and taking advantage of employer matches, you can set a strong foundation for retirement. So for example, if you start investing in your 30s, and let's pretend you make $80,000 per year, if you can save 15 to 20% of your income annually, you actually will be able to end up with a $2 million balance by the time you retire. This also accounts for a 7% return rate with the S&P 500, but please note that in the last 10 or 20 years, the S&P 500 has actually averaged much more than that. Now, if you're starting later, let's say you're in your 40s, you'll likely need to increase your contributions to catch up in order to hit $2 million of a portfolio balance. So let's say you're 45 years old and you make $200K per year, but you're willing to commit to saving 35% of that that every single year, that's going to be a huge savings rate. Now, if you're able to stick with that savings rate and you get a 7% return in your portfolio, you'll probably retire with close to $4.8 million, which I think we can all agree is not too bad. The idea here is that you can still catch up even at age, let's say 45, if you're willing to actually save a large portion of your income. Now, you might not get to $4.8 million, but the idea is that if you can commit to saving a large portion, it's going to take you a very long way. The biggest takeaway here is to get investing as soon as possible and invest as much as you can without putting unnecessary strain on yourself and your family. Ultimately, the goal isn't to retire with a $2 million number in mind, but perhaps just to have a strategy that allows you to enjoy your retirement while your money continues to grow and last for the long term. And I think you can do that at many different portfolio sizes, but let me know your comments down below. I would love to hear from you. If you'd like to watch this video on the $1.8 million retirement lie, that's where everyone thinks that you need $1.8 million to retire comfortably. We actually talk about that in this video right here, and it actually challenges the 4% rule a little bit, so you'll want to check out that video right there. As always, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you guys in a future video. All right, thank you for being here. Peace.